Hi, I'm Johnny from UltimatePaperMache.com, and this week I thought I was going to be making a rabbit, but instead I played around with a product that I found on Amazon.com. It's called Epoxy Sculpt Clay. I'm still working on my goblin project, and I started this whole project so far in advance that it's given me plenty of time to do a whole bunch of experiments. I've made several heads using my cardboard mannequin and some modeling clay and plaster cloth over it. And I like that process. I really enjoy using modeling clay to make faces of any kind, especially with a project like this where you really just get to play and you don't have to make them perfect. It's just, just fun. But I was having a real problem with the texture of the faces. The plaster cloth has a texture that does not look right to me. Everything else about the two heads that I've made so far I really like, but I did not like the texture. I've done some experiments. I showed you Grandma Goblin where I made a thickened wood glue for a coating, and it waterproofed her, but it just didn't cover the texture the way I wanted to. And when I saw this, it was so much less expensive than the other epoxy clay that I've used. And I know that this can go outside, doesn't have any kind of texture, so I thought maybe I should make the faces with this. I have used epoxy clay before. Right now my gnome is in a blizzard kind of, and I brushed a little bit of snow off of his face so you can see kind of that if there wasn't any snow on his face, it looks exactly the same way it did when I first put him out there. The gnome's face was made with the Magic Sculpt. It's an epoxy clay that I really love working with. That's my favorite. The squirrel was made with a smooth-on product, and I can't remember the exact name of it. I'll put it right here. We had a really bad windstorm, and it blew a tree branch on him, and even though it completely knocked him off of the bench that he's sitting on, the only damage that was done was a little chip came off of his ear. Other than that, he looks exactly the same way he did when I put him out there quite a few years ago. Mama and baby mountain goat, there's no videos or anything for that one. There are for the other ones, and I'll put links to them below, but this one I just did it for myself. It was a wedding present actually, and it was done with Epoxy Sculpt, which sounds an awful lot like Epoxy Sculpt, but it's very different. That actually works. I'm doing this review just to convince you that maybe going with the cheapest product isn't a good idea. Let me show you why. I did make one of my cardboard mannequins. I think I printed it at 57% to make it just slightly smaller than Daddy Goblin. And then I added some crumpled foil just to fill in some spaces so that I wouldn't have to use quite so much of the epoxy clay. It is less expensive than the regular stuff, but you don't want to use any more than you have to. So I filled it in with some crumpled foil and some hot glue, let that cool down, and then I started mixing up the epoxy clay. You just do it the same as you do any other epoxy clay. You half and half of part A and part B. One part is slightly darker than the other one. It would have been a lot more helpful to me with my old eyeballs if one of the parts had been darker, but it did mix up pretty well. At the beginning, it sticks really bad to your gloves. According to the instructions, it says after soaking your hands with water, it will not stick to your hands during operation. That may work if you're using gloves, but don't ever use epoxy clay without gloves, not just with your hands. You don't want it to come in contact with your skin while you're actually working with it. It's not safe. I started out by putting a really thin layer of the epoxy clay over the foil and the armature, and it seemed to be doing okay. I just wanted a really thin layer that I could allow to harden up just for a few minutes so that I'd have kind of a firm base to work on. But as soon as I started actually adding features and trying to get everything to, make a decent sculpture, that's when I started running into problems. So like here, I'm just working on her cheek. It should be able to just smooth off real nice, just like regular modeling clay. It always has when I'm working with any of the big brands of Epoxy Sculpt, but I just couldn't do it with this one. I've even tried using a tool to kind of push things together, And in a lot of places, I was just never able to get rid of that seam. I did make a mistake, though, I have to admit. Because I'm so used to using Magic Sculpt, I tried using water to smooth off the surface. And there's nothing in the advertising of or instructions for this particular product that says that that would work. And the Magic Sculpt advertising claims that it's the only one that will work with water. I think I've used water with other brands, but it's been a while, so probably not. It definitely doesn't work with this one. Like just right now, I dipped my tool in water, trying to get a little bit of help here with smoothing it out, and it just doesn't do anything at all. And I kept trying it anyway, and I just, because nothing else was working, I just simply could not get two pieces to meld properly. It was just so frustrating. I made a couple of cardboard ears just to make sure that both ears were the same size, and stuck them on with the epoxy clay. The first one worked okay. It held on really well, and I used one really big piece of the clay to cover the inside of the first ear. So I didn't get any seams on the inside of that ear, and the epoxy clay held pretty well. As you can see, I'm actually attaching it to the cardboard, the mannequin itself. There's no clay under this particular area, and it stuck on really good. The ear stayed where it belonged, and after I had left it overnight to harden, it looked just fine. I didn't want to start working on the other ear when the first one was still soft, because I knew I was going to mess it up, so I did leave it overnight. The second ear, unfortunately, was different. It didn't actually stick and hold the ear where it belonged. You can see there that the seam actually opened up a little bit. And maybe that was my fault because I was trying so hard to smooth it off with water. Maybe it just weakened the product enough so that it just wouldn't stick to itself anymore. I added just a little bit of new clay over the old clay right on the tip of that new ear, just because I wanted the curve of the tip to match to the other one. And I could not meld that new piece into the old one. There was a seam there, and I absolutely could not get it off. I guess you'd have to sand it if you wanted to do, to make it look like one piece. I put a lot of texture in just with the wrinkled up gloves on a really thin layer over everything else. I was kind of hoping I could make it look like, old lady's skin, so that the seams would look kind of like, I don't know, wrinkles or something. And I guess it kind of does, but I just don't like the way it looks. It looks sloppy. It doesn't look like I did it on purpose. That's what I'm thinking. Since I can't really tell exactly what brand it is, I'm going to put a link to it down below so that you can actually see the page on Amazon that I got this from. And I'm highly recommending that you don't buy it unless you actually have used it before and you know what I did wrong. Maybe there's something that I was doing that made it so hard to work with. And if you do know what I could have done differently, please let us know in the comments down below. But I'm never going to buy this stuff again. I don't even know what I'm going to do with what's left over in the containers. Now, what am I going to do next? I'm going to keep working on goblins, and I am going to make that rabbit, by the way. That's going to come up next. But I want to do a couple more experiments just to see if maybe there's a possibility that I could cover up the texture of the plaster cloth and make it waterproof, because this was kind of fun to do. I do know now, because I've done so many experiments during the week when you weren't watching, I know how to get the clay out. When you saw me making this guy, you saw that I actually had to cut the mannequin apart in order to get the plaster cloth off and take the clay out, and that was totally crazy. I shouldn't have done it that way. You just put a plastic bag over the mannequin. You have to do a little bit of taping of the plastic bag to get it to form to the shapes. Then you put your modeling clay over the plastic bag. Then you put your paper strips and paste or plaster cloth over the modeling clay. And when it's all dry, you just pull it all off together. I mean, it's really easy. Because I found that it is a lot easier to use plaster cloth over modeling clay and over the mannequins, I would like to make the rest of my goblin family this way. but that's only going to work if my next two experiments work. I found a 9-year-old video showing a do-it-yourself foam coating. I'm going to try it, and that one is not very expensive. And I also ordered a foam coating from, I think it's called the Hot Wire Foam Factory. If either one of those work, then I'm going to go ahead and make the rest of my goblin family using the modeling clay and the plaster cloth, just because I think it's fun. But if those experiments don't work, then I'm going to go ahead and order some Magic Sculpt. That's what I made the gnome with. You saw him sitting under snow. We had a blizzard yesterday when I was taking that picture, and he's been out, since 2019 or something. I mean, and it's still exactly the same as it was when I put him out there. So I know it works. I know it's waterproof. I know that you can smooth it off and make a beautiful sculpture with it, unlike this stuff. But like I said, I may have made major mistakes. Maybe I just wasn't doing it right. Maybe there's some secret to using it to make it easier. If you do know any of those secrets, please let us know in the comments down below. So I am going to do the experiments with the plaster cloth. If none of them work, I'm going to order the other epoxy clay, and I'm also going to go ahead and make that rabbit that I keep saying I'm going to make. Hopefully that's going to show up in the next video. Make sure that you watch for it and come visit me, ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.